Pooh's federal paperwork just dropped, and the allegations are way worse than that first FBI raid headline. At first, this looked like a simple break-in story. Federal agents hit a home tied to Pooh family in Cordova. Cameras showed up, and people started guessing. But now the complaint is out, and the feds are saying this was not just a search. They're alleging a full kidnapping case involving him, his father, Big30, and 6 other men tied to a January 10th studio incident in Dallas. And the way they describe it is what changes everything. According to the affidavit, 3 victims flew into Dallas for what was supposed to be a business meeting connected to Pooh's recording deal. The complaint says the charge is kidnapping and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. And it names all 9 defendants right there on page 1. So this is not social media talking. This is not blogger speculation. This is federal paperwork spelling out what investigators say happened. And once you get into the actual story the feds are telling, the raid almost becomes the side note. Because the real bombshell is not just that Pooh got named in a new case. It's that prosecutors are saying this meeting was allegedly built around one goal, forcing a release from his contract. And if that's really what happened, then this story instantly becomes one of the wildest federal rap cases we've seen in a minute. According to the affidavit, this all starts like a business play. The paperwork says the victims flew into Dallas that afternoon for a scheduled meeting between RD and Pooh. Investigators say Pooh had been signed to RD's 1017 label since around 2021, and that he was upset with the terms of the deal and wanted out of his contractual obligations. That is the key setup. The affidavit says Pooh asked RD to come to Dallas so they could talk about business. The victims arrived. The studio was initially closed. They waited, bought liquor, and red Solo cups. And then the studio was eventually opened after Pooh's father allegedly worked to book it for that afternoon. Then the paperwork says the room started filling up. Investigators say Pooh, his father, Big30, and the rest of the group entered the building and moved inside the studio. One man was even allegedly seen on surveillance, leaving the building and coming back with a bag over his shoulder. That detail matters later. So right there, the tone changes. This was not the feds describing a random argument that suddenly exploded. They're painting a picture of a coordinated arrival, a controlled setting, and a meeting that may have looked normal from the outside, but, according to investigators, was already heading somewhere darker. And what happened once Pooh got RD alone is the part that gives this entire video its title. The strongest allegation in this whole file is the contract release scene. According to the affidavit, the victims overheard Pooh talking on the phone about being out on rec time, and they noticed he was wearing an ankle monitor. RD reportedly told him they could just reschedule the session. But instead, the paperwork says Pooh asked to speak with RD privately in the recording room. That is where the case turns. The feds allege Pooh pulled out release paperwork from a bag and told RD to sign it. When RD refused, the affidavit says Pooh became agitated, told Big30 to get his bag, and then pulled what appeared to be a black AK-style pistol from it. According to investigators, RD then signed the release paperwork at gunpoint while Pooh's father and Big30 stood there. The affidavit says Big30 allegedly pulled out a cell phone and recorded RD being forced to say he was releasing Pooh from the contract. Then, after the signature, investigators say Pooh took RD's wedding ring, watch, earrings, and cash. And the paperwork says it still wasn't over. The affidavit claims Pooh handed the paperwork to his father, asked if it was good, and was told it needed a date. So the feds say RD was forced to add that too. That is the allegation that changes this from a regular robbery story into a full-on power move case. Because if prosecutors prove that part, then this was not just about taking property. It was also about forcing paperwork under pressure. And while that alleged contract release was happening in one room, the paperwork says the rest of the studio was turning into a trap. According to the affidavit, once Pooh, his father, and Big30 came back out, the other men allegedly pulled handguns and AR or AK style pistols on the remaining victims. The complaint says one victim was pushed onto a couch and robbed of his wallet, while a chain and a 1017 pendant were also allegedly taken. Another victim was allegedly threatened for moving. Investigators say Pooh even told one of the men not to shoot. Then the story gets even uglier. The affidavit says another victim was choked from behind to the point he nearly lost consciousness, leaving scratches on his neck and wrist. Investigators also say he was robbed of a Rolex, a Louis Vuitton bag with other expensive watches inside, AirPods, and his wallet. And then comes Big30 again. According to the complaint, Big30 walked over to the studio door, shut it, and blocked it with his body, stopping the victims from getting out while their security tried to force their way in. The affidavit says the guards realized they were outnumbered by armed men, and once the feds started stacking that with surveillance and tracking data, the case got even more serious. This is where the case gets dangerous for Pooh in a completely different way. The receipts trail. According to the affidavit, investigators say Pooh was still serving a 63-month sentence from his earlier federal firearms conspiracy case and had been approved for home detention in late October 2025. The paperwork says one of his conditions was that he could not possess a deadly weapon or knowingly be around someone who had one. Then the feds start laying out how they say they tracked everything. They say electronic monitoring data placed Pooh at or near the offense location. They say his father was captured on surveillance at a Staples in Frisco shortly before the meeting went straight to the copy machines, and that investigators believe he and Pooh printed the release paperwork there. They also point to rental records showing the white Buick used in the case was rented by Pooh's father, plus license plate reader hits, cell phone records, and hotel footage that they say mapped the group's travel from Memphis to Dallas and then back again. That's not a weak evidence list. That's the kind of paperwork that makes a breaking story feel real. Because now, the feds are not just saying who they think was there. They're saying how they believe they can prove it. And if that wasn't enough, the complaint says the social media side may have made things even worse. The final twist is the part that feels almost too reckless to be true. According to the affidavit, investigators say fingerprint hits tied two defendants to red Solo cups at the scene. Then they move into Instagram. The paperwork says one defendant was identified through posts showing a Rolex that looked like the one taken from the victim, along with a Dallas location tag. It also says later posts showed what appeared to be the stolen 1017 pendant. Another defendant was allegedly seen on surveillance, leaving with a Louis Vuitton bag that matched the one reported stolen, and then later posted a rare Batman Rolex that investigators say looked visually similar to the victim's missing watch. That is brutal from a case-building standpoint, because once prosecutors can argue you've got the meeting set up, the forced paperwork allegation, the guns, the stolen property, the travel trail, the hotel footage, the fingerprints, and then social posts showing off items that look like the missing pieces, the whole story starts to close in. Now, to be clear, these are still allegations in a criminal complaint, and every defendant is presumed innocent unless and until the government proves its case in court. But from a YouTube story angle, this is why the paperwork is way bigger than the original raid. The raid got people curious. The complaint gave the story teeth. Now, the biggest question is what happens next, because this story still doesn't feel finished. If you want the next chapter when it drops, subscribe.